In this video, we're going to talk about contractions. This particular lesson comes from the book Clear Speech, and I've included a digital download for this in your Google Classroom. Let's look at the instructions here at the top. There are different ways to de-emphasize a structure word in English. So one way is by contraction. Now, to contract means to make smaller. Auxiliary verbs, or sometimes called helping verbs, and the word not are normally contracted and connected to the word that comes before them. This helps to make these structure words less noticeable and makes the more important words, the content words, easier to notice. Now, notice how the following structure words are contracted. So let's practice these together. Okay, you try them now. You have equals you've. Say that again. You've. Next one. He would equals he'd. He'd. Cannot equals can't. Now notice I didn't finish the T with this particular pronunciation, so I kind of stopped on the T. But you can hear this part of the word more clearly. So listen to it again. Can't. Can't. Now if you compare it to this word here, can, can't, you'll notice the N sounds a little longer in its sound. Now we'll do another activity that'll practice the difference between can and can't in a different video. But for now, try that one more time. Cannot, can't. Okay, let's try the last one. I will, I'll. I'll. Now notice it says you do not have to use contractions when you speak, but it is important for you to learn to hear them easily. So again, that's what we're trying to teach here in these pronunciation lessons. So you may not necessarily use them, but it is definitely true that English speakers use them, and they use them a lot. So we're going to practice here in this example. Now notice when we contract words, oftentimes the full form of the particular contraction will contract into one particular sound or one particular syllable. So for example, the words on the left will have two beats, two syllables, but when we contract them, they will only have one. So much like linking, we actually reduce the rhythmic time of these two words. But again, this is not exactly linking. If you remember, this is where we're cutting a sound and putting them together to make this contraction. Let's say them together. I am, I'm, I'm. Do not, don't, don't. And again, notice I didn't finish the T. They have, they've, they've. That is, that's, that's. I would, I'd, I'd. Okay, over on the right side. He has, he's, he's. I will, I'll, I'll. I have, I've, I've. We have, we've, we. eve. And finally, will not. This one's rather strange. Won't. Won't. Let's go back to a couple to discuss. For example, let's practice with he has, he's. Let's practice for just a moment distinguishing between he's and this second word here. Let's try that together. He's, his. He's, his. So one thing you'll notice is that we do keep that E sound in he's. But again, his is a shorter word. Okay? But again, students often get these two words confused when it comes to pronunciation. You'll also notice that with most of the particular examples with the T and even the V sounds, we don't make them very strong to hear. So for example, when we say don't, well, that's very similar to what we talked about earlier with can't. The T itself, usually we stop on the T sound. So again, in North American English, we normally don't finish the T sound. So for example, in British English, they might say don't, don't, can't, can't. But again, in North American English, we normally don't finish the T. Now when it comes to the VE and they've, it almost disappears. So it's a very, very short sound. You'll notice that most North American speakers don't really emphasize the V that strongly. So instead of saying they've, they will say they've, they've. So again, there are a couple of situations here where, yes, contractions can make it very, very hard to hear. Now, of course, context is the most important thing. So we're going to practice some sentences using contractions here in the next part of this video. Let's practice more contractions with the next activity. In this activity, we will see on the left side the full form of the word, of the group of words, and on the right side the contraction. Practice these with me. She is, she's. Cannot, can't. I have, I've. Why have, why've. He has, he's. Who is, whose. Where did, where'd. We are, we're. They are, there. He had, he'd. Now, in looking at these contractions, again, we can see some challenges. For example, in many of these examples, we've seen where contractions, in many ways, occurred in places where linking would also occur. For example, for she is, we would link the E in she to the I with that particular, if you remember, we called it a glide sound. She is. She is. So in a way, a contraction is a further opportunity to shorten the rhythmic time of those particular groups of words. So for example, let's try thinking about the linked example. Let's go from the full form to the linked example to the contraction. Notice how the time gets a little shorter. It gets a little faster to speak. She is, she is, she's. Try it again. She is, she is, she's. So again, contractions are again kind of a more extreme way to shorten the time that it takes to pronounce these particular groups of words. Yes, in some cases like cannot, we can link or blend rather the ends, but again notice a contraction is a further way to reduce that particular time. Another problem that we see with contractions is that often contractions can sound exactly the same. For example, in number 5, he has, he's. Well, again, you might remember that we contract he is exactly the same way, he's. So in comparing these two examples, we notice they sound exactly the same. The question is, how do we know which one we are using? Well, once again, we have to think about context. So, for example, if I said he's from Mexico, which one are we using? Are we using he has, or are we using he is? In this case, the full form would be he is from Mexico. So, as you can see, that can be a challenge. When it comes to he has, generally we use this contraction when we use the present perfect. So for example, if I said he has been to Mexico, then when we contract he's been to Mexico, the difference of course is in that participle, been. He's been. So part of the challenge of understanding how contractions and other types of reductions work is to also understand how English functions. So in this case, we have to know the grammar difference. In number 5, he has, this is the helping word for the present perfect. So in this case, we have to recognize that the present perfect is a grammatical form that exists in English. And that's a challenge for many students. If they've never studied the present perfect before, they might get this confused. Now, the truth is, even English speakers often get this confused. Again, most English speakers learned grammar a long time ago, so often they make these particular mistakes. We can see these mistakes in other examples. For example, when we use have as the participle. So for example, if we say they have or we have. As we mentioned in our reductions video, people often get have and of confused because when they are reduced, they sound exactly the same. Of. So for example, if we were to say this, for example, he should have been. He should have been. Well, again, in spelling, when we see the contraction, we can see that it is have. But in listening, it does sound a lot like the word of. So often you might see people misspell. So for example, you might see something like this on Facebook or social media where people misspell the word have because they're spelling it as if they pronounce it. And again, this is a common challenge even for English speakers. So one of the difficulties of contractions is to recognize what the sentence is actually saying, thinking about the grammar of the sentence. And again, when you look at number 7 and number 10 here on the screen, notice they contract the same way. So where did, where'd. he had, he'd. In both cases, the contractions look exactly the same. So we have to think about the original sentences and the meaning of those sentences when you're practicing. Let's move on to another activity. In our final activity with contractions, let's practice these common expressions. Again, notice how each one has a contraction. Practice these with me. What's new? What's new? How are you doing? How are you doing? How's it going? How's it going? How have you been? How have you been? What's up? What's up? What'll you have? What'll you have? It's great to see you. It's great to see you. I don't believe it. I don't believe it. Now again, in going back to the phrases, let's see if we can identify what the original or the full form of the contractions were. So for example, in number 1, what's new? What is the original form of the word? What is? In number 2, how are? What about number 3? How is? Number 4, how have? See, how have. Number 5, what is? Number 6, what will? Number 7, it is. And number 8, do not. Now again, in many of these we didn't need to write them, we could see. But again, for the S examples, we had to make sure, are we using has or are we using is? And in this case, all of these were using is. Again, take some time, go back and practice these common expressions using contractions. Thanks for watching.